Biden is just days into his second term, and the popularity that he once enjoyed has waned. But the Supreme Court news today may be an opportunity for him to turn all that around. According to a new poll by Pew Research, Biden is kicking off year 2 of his presidency with diminished public support and a daunting list of challenges. His numbers have essentially flipped, with 41% of the U.S. adults now saying they approve of his handling of his job, a number that was at 59% in April. Only 44% say that they are very or somewhat confident Biden can handle the pandemic. That's down from 65% last March. With the midterms fast approaching, the perception is setting in. Biden is losing. But today's news that Associate Justice Stephen Breyer will retire comes at a great time for the president. Nominating a black woman to the nation's highest court is a promise Biden made and can keep. And not only can he make this nomination on his own, but it will probably be very difficult for the Senate to block it. And there's less likely to obstruct it because it won't disturb the balance of the court. Joining me now to discuss is Dr. Niambi Carter, Associate Professor of Political Science at Howard University. So, Dr. Carter, we see the situation that Biden has himself in with the polls. They've been sliding, even among black people, probably more concerning among black people. They've also been sliding. This is an opportunity for Biden to do something that he promised and that black people, I think, and I think the entire American public will applaud him for. What do you think of this opportunity that is presented to Biden?
Well, listen, he is really standing on the precipice of going down in history, right, and solidifying a legacy for himself if he can get this done. Now, of course, this means that he can't muck it up and start talking about other concerns or there are other things. You know, you've heard all this sort of false conversation about whether a black woman could be qualified. It should be more about qualifications and identity. But he made a promise, and he made a promise to one of his most loyal bases of voters, which are black women who have saved him time and time again. So I think this is a moment that if he just does the most basic thing, which is nominate multiple qualified black women to this position, then he will actually have a victory, and he really needs one now. Build Back Better, voting rights, all of that has been going nowhere, but he can actually do this and look like a hero at the end of the day. So this is really easy, but I don't know. Sometimes this administration gives me pause.
So Democrats in the Senate have suggested they're going to try to fast track this thing, get it out of the way well ahead of the midterms, not have it bump into that. But how do you see this playing out with the other legislative agenda items that they already have? They're still trying to chop up Build Back Better into something smaller chunks to see if they can get any of those passed. They're still trying to resurrect something on voting rights and get that passed. How does this all fit together? Because the legislative calendar is what it is.
Well, look, they're going to have to chew gum and rub their tummies at the same time. I mean, this is going to have to be something that is a both and proposition. It can't be what it has been, which is either we do this or the other thing. That's what they did with Build Back Better and voting rights. You have to get this judicial nominee through, in part because we know the Republican shenanigans at this point, which is they'll come up with some arbitrary rule about it's too close to the election or it's too far away from something else, right? They keep moving the goalposts just like they did at the end of Obama's term. So we cannot at this point afford to let this moment pass him by. There's a lot of momentum. I think there's a lot of positive feeling about this. And if he can just get this done, then I think it helps at least smooth the perception that he's been ineffectual in these other areas. And I know that there's a lot still to do here, but I think having a win in one of these domains allows something else in a positive direction to happen with Build Back Better and in the voting rights arena.
Yeah, I think you're right. There will be Republican opposition, but I think do you not also agree that this also makes a kingmaker of Manchin once again? In the same way he was a kingmaker on Build Back Better and tanked it, in the same way he was a kingmaker on he and Kristen Sinema were on voting rights and tanked it. They still need their votes again if there is unified Republican opposition. Not saying that there will be, but just in case there is, they'll need him again. Is there anything that you think that could be a roadblock to the people whose names are now being floated to get the 50+1 votes that need to be confirmed to the Supreme Court?
Well, look, I think by the very nature of the fact that these are Black women, people are already going to see them as activists and perhaps more progressive or leftist than they actually are. I think this is going to be one where Biden is going to have to pick someone probably who is a little bit more centrist, maybe just a little left of center, right? Because he knows that, Joe Manchin is looking for a reason to say no, right? Because he wants to have this mantle as this sort of principled opposition, right, to sort of the Democrats riding roughshod over process. And so I think Joe Biden, who also is a centrist, is going to pick someone out of this list of names, but I don't think it will be Cheryl Eiffel, despite her amazing qualifications for many of the reasons you just pointed out in the previous segment, which is she has been out here in the trenches fighting the good fight, and people will use every part of her legal career against her, the same way they did with Lonnie Guinier, who unfortunately just passed away and won't see this moment years ago when she was up for Attorney General. So I think this is a moment where Biden is going to have to pick one of these women, but he has to be very clear about what their judicial records look like, what their records as jurists look like, and how they are essentially non-threatening. And I know that makes us feel less than positive, but he has to please a lot of customers here because he knows Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema can't be counted on. They could break away very easily.
Let's drill down into that discomfort because, it is a profound statement to say that we cannot have a more activist or leftist or progressive candidate because, if we say that, we're basically saying that Thurgood Marshall was the first and the last, right? Thurgood Marshall was in the trenches. If there was a Twitter, they would have had every one of his tweets up. He was out, he was speaking, he was an activist among activists. He just also happened to be a lawyer. Are we saying that those days for Black people are over? We're always going to have to tack towards the center to get someone onto the court?
I don't know if it's going to be always, but I think right now that's where we are. That conservative majority is going to be firm for quite some time. But I still think even with that firm conservative majority, a Thurgood Marshall, if he had social media 50, 60 years ago, I don't think would have been on that court in the same way. He also just had a different court who had a different, I think, posture about what they were there to do, right? Which is to create justice, not just wait for justice to fall upon it, right? They changed the law, they changed the country, and the country caught up to them, not the other way around. And now we have a Supreme Court that seems to be very much interested in taking us back to a time, say, pre-Thurgood Marshall, right? Whether it's about affirmative action or abortion rights or voting rights. So we have to, I think, just be practical to a certain extent. This is not just an exercise of what would be the most just or who would be the best just for the court, but there are political matters here. And I don't think we can get away from the fact that Black women's identities are politicized, their politics are politicized, and that this entire process is politicized. I don't care about these high-minded ideals that others would like to talk about. The judiciary is a political body, and these nominations are also political. And we have to think about the context that we're in. And I think that this is going to be the path of least resistance, because you don't want to have to, explain or do what they've had to do all these months with Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema again about why this person makes sense. So I think the fact that he's already picking a Black woman, which people have already decided is an activist step, and to then pick someone who is, in fact, a jurist who happens to do social good, right, in their legal careers, I think that's just going to be a bridge too far for some people. And I don't think we should give up, right? I think there is a place for those folks, and we need them sorely, especially on this body. But I think we are in a moment where that won't happen for quite some time.
Dr. Niambi Carter, as you know, you do not have to be a lawyer or a judge in order to be considered. They might be running a background check on you as we speak. Anyway, thank you for joining us tonight. If we call you and you are not available, we'll know that you are on the Supreme Court and you can no longer join us on this show.